another fantastic lesson. So today we're working on a math lesson and we are continuing our exploration with measurement. So today's lesson is titled Select and Use Customary Tools. So let's look at our objective, boys and girls. Today, students will choose the appropriate customary tool and measure objects by length. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to take a close look at some measuring tools. So we've already introduced a few measuring tools, and we're going to look at those again. So if you remember, we talked about our ruler, our handy dandy ruler. You may have a school ruler like this that I gave you, or perhaps you have a wooden ruler. And we practiced measuring inches with the ruler. And if you recall, how many inches in a ruler? If you said 12, you are correct. There are 12 inches in a ruler, and a ruler is 1 foot long. So that's some of the information that we learned and we practiced in our previous lessons. And we also talked about a yardstick. So here's our handy dandy yardstick. And if you recall, how many inches make up a yard? Or do we have a yardstick? If you said 36 inches, once again you are correct. 36 inches equals 1 yard, and this is a yardstick. So how many rulers or how many feet equal 1 yard? Or how many inches are in 1 yard? If you said 36 inches, 3 feet equal 1 yard, then you are correct. So we had practice with these two measuring tools, and we talked about inches, and today we're going to think about another measuring tool. So we're going to add one more to look at and practice with. So let's just look at this information up here first, and then I'll actually show it to you. So we're going to talk about a measuring tape, and sometimes it's called a tape measure. So measuring tape or tape measure, whichever way you prefer to say it, it's the same thing. So it is a flexible ruler used to measure size or distance. It can be made of plastic, cloth, or metal. It's marked with units of length such as inches, centimeters, or feet. So we've talked about inches and feet, so that's what we're going to look at closely in our measuring tapes or tape measures, whichever you prefer to call it. So if you look over here, I have 3 different types of measuring tapes, and let me talk about this one first. So this is one that is flexible, and it's made of plastic. Okay, so flexible means you can move it around, and it is made of plastic. And this one goes up to 60 inches long. So it's 60 inches long. And certain things are better to measure with this type of measuring tape. Okay, so this would be appropriate for certain things. This is the type of measuring tape or tape measure that you would see a seamstress use, or somebody who works in the sewing industry. This is the type of measuring tape that they would use. So for example, let's just say I wanted to make Betty a dress, and I wanted to measure the length of her arms. I could use something like this. If I wanted to measure her neck to make her a new bow, I could see it's 15 inches. I would know how long to make it or cut it. So this is what you would see a seamstress or a tailor use if they are dealing with fabric. And it could be used for other things that can't be easily measured with a ruler or yardstick or the other types of measuring tapes. This is one that you can use. Okay, so this is really handy to have. And let's talk about the other ones. So these are very similar. This one is shorter, it's smaller, as you can see. It says here 6 feet is how long this one extends to, and this one extends to 25 feet. So this is a bigger one. So if you see this one here, it has a keychain, so maybe somebody would use this as a keychain. And these, if you use this as a keychain, then you might be a person who does lots of measuring. So it depends what you do for a living. Maybe if you are a person who thinks about building, or maybe measuring furniture or something like that, you might keep one of these or have it on hand, and that's why it has a little keychain. And this is a bigger one, so 25 feet, so that's big. So if somebody were to use this, they'd be measuring very large objects. And let me just pull this one out. So I'm sure you must have seen these before at your house. Maybe your family keeps this. You may have seen it in your mom or dad's toolbox. So it's retractable, meaning that it goes back in once you let go of it. And you just keep measuring. And this right here, the end, is where you would actually begin your measurement. And it kind of has like a little hook so you can grab on and then begin your measuring. Okay? So that's how this is used. And it also has a little button that tells you that you could push it and it won't extend anymore. That's like when you've already come to the end of your measurement. Okay, and this is pretty much the same way, but like I said, it's bigger. Okay, and it's also retractable. All of these, I believe, are retractable. It even has like a little hook here if you were to put this on your belt or your tool belt. I guess that's what it would be called. Okay, so this would be for larger objects. So these are the tools that we're going to think about today as we decide which would be the best measuring tool to use for different objects or different items. So let's look at our handy dandy chart here that has lots of useful information. So up at the top it says helpful information. Measure objects shorter than a foot with an inch ruler. So if I have something small to measure, I'd use my inch ruler. Objects longer than a foot with a yardstick. So if I want to measure something larger than a foot, I'd use my yardstick. And objects longer than 3 feet with a measuring tape. So that's when I would use this one. Okay, and let's choose the best measurement tool to measure real life objects. So that's what we're going to think about. And I know I didn't show this one right now, but this would count as our measuring tape. And I said that this is super flexible. So this is something that you would use for certain objects that might be shaped kind of oddly or kind of weird for you to measure with this. You would use this. Now, let's look at the bottom part of our poster here. So we have inch ruler to choose from, yardstick, and measuring tape or tape measure, whichever you prefer to call it. And we're going to think about the best measurement tool to choose to measure these real life objects. So real life objects, not the pictures there, but real life objects. So let's say I want to measure a beach ball. Think about that, boys and girls. What should I use to measure a beach ball? And I don't have one. I wish I did have one so that I could model for you. But think about it. Which tool would I use? Would it be appropriate to use a ruler, a yardstick, or a measuring tape? And remember, when we think of our measuring tapes, we're thinking of the two different kind that I talked about. The one that is retractable and it's made of metal, or this soft one. Think about it. So I think that it would make sense to use this soft one to measure a beach ball. I'm sorry I don't have one here with me, but you can visualize it or picture it in your head. If I want to measure something round like a ball, it would be appropriate to use something like this, because I can wrap it around the ball. Okay, so this soft measuring tape would be appropriate to measure a beach ball. What about a house? What if I were to measure a real life house? I wanted to know the measurements. Perhaps your house is getting worked on, painted, and you want to know the measurement. What would you use? Would you use an inch ruler, a yardstick, or a measuring tape? And go back to this information because it's important. So what should you use? If you said a measuring tape or a tape measure, then you are correct. Okay, houses are big. They're large objects, and you would require something like a measuring tape like this. This one goes out to 25 feet. So this is what you would use if you were measuring a house. What about a marker? If you want to measure the length of a marker, what should you use? If you said inch ruler, you are correct. Okay, some markers might be as little as this one. So yes, it would be correct to use a inch ruler or ruler, we could just call it ruler, to measure a marker. What about a bulletin board? Think about the bulletin boards at school. What can you use to measure a bulletin board? Okay, if you said yardstick, that would totally be appropriate. A yardstick is what you would use to measure a bulletin board. And of course, it depends how big your bulletin board or how long is. Some are very long, some are medium length, but I think a yardstick would be appropriate. What about a postage stamp? Okay, postage stamps. Those are what we put on our letters when we're gonna mail them. Okay. If you said an inch ruler would be appropriate, then you are correct. That is what you would use to measure a postage stamp. What about a table? You want to find out how long your table is, or maybe you want to know how wide it is. You can use an inch ruler. An inch ruler would be appropriate if your table's very long. You might want to use a yardstick to measure how long it is. Maybe you want to use a ruler to measure how tall it is from the ground. So something like these two would be correct. Really more like a ruler, I would think. What about the door? What if you want to find out how wide a door is? Okay, if you recall, we in a past lesson we talked about the door, and we said that most doors are 3 feet wide, which is 1 yard. So we could use this just to make sure that our door is 1 yard wide. And you can also use this to figure out how tall your door is. Or you could use this, but I think it would be best to use a yardstick to figure out how tall your door is. So, you know, what I really want you to understand is that we have different measuring tools, and each measuring tool is used to measure something based on the size of the object. So once again, shorter objects or small objects are measured with an inch ruler. Objects that are more than 1 foot long are measured with a yardstick. And any object that is longer than 3 feet, then you would want to use a measuring tape. Once again, we talked about this one. So anything that might be oddly shaped, you might use one of these measuring tapes. Or if you are measuring something like Betty, or someone, I should say, like Betty the Bunny, you might use one of these to make her some clothing, or maybe to make your doll some clothing. These are very helpful in that type of stuff. So these are the different tools that we're talking about, and these are the different measuring tools that you're going to see in your lesson. So I'm gonna ask you to get some practice on deciding which measuring tool would be the best to use. And you're going to take out My Math Volume 2, and you're going to turn to page 657, where it says select and use customary tools. And if you look at the bottom, there are directions. There is directions there. It says draw an object you would measure with an inch ruler in box 1. Draw an object you would measure with a yardstick in box 2. And box 3, draw an object you would measure with a measuring tape. Okay? And it says explain your drawing. So if you draw something here, explain why you would use a ruler to measure that object. Whatever you draw here, explain why you would use the yardstick to measure that object. And whatever you draw here, explain why you would use a measuring tape to measure that object. Then turn the page, and like I always tell you, the top of the page always has some very useful information. So at the top of page 658, it says you can select and use tools to measure length. Circle the tool you would use to measure a marker. And there you see the different measuring tools that I just talked about. And as you can see, they did it for you. They measured the inch ruler because the inch ruler is appropriate to use if you are measuring a marker. And here you have the helpful information or the helpful hint that was on our poster. Measure objects shorter than a foot with an inch ruler, objects longer than a foot with a yardstick, and objects longer than 3 feet with a measuring tape. So this is super helpful in deciding which tool you should use. Now, if you look at page 658 at the bottom and 659, you are going to look for that object. And once again, if you don't have that real life object at your home, then you can, for example, this is an eraser for a whiteboard. If you don't have that, then you can cross it out, and maybe it's just going to be a regular eraser you would use for erasing pencil mistakes. You write what tool you use, and then you actually measure it. So you're going to go through each picture, look at the picture, decide which would be the best tool to measure that real life object, and then measure it. And notice that it says about. So if you are using a yardstick, then you might put about 3 yards. Make sure that you put the measurement that you are using. If you're using inches, if you're using yards, or whatever it is that you may be using. And we have some problem solving in the back. So those are word problems that also ask you to think about which would be the best measuring tool to solve the problem. So once again, you're responsible to do 658, 659, 660. And once you are done with that, we're going to go over it. So I'd like for you to really put effort into that assignment and be sure that you're ready to go over it when we talk about it again on Zoom. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope today's lesson was helpful, and I hope you enjoyed it. Can't wait to see you guys soon. Bye.